maximally sensual sex. Maximally. It's fun to say. It's even kind of sensual to say. Maximally. Clickbait title, if there ever was one. I got to tell you, religions are great for clickbait titles. I think the best one is Eternal Life. That's a great clickbait title, but not quite as good even as maximally sensual sex. I mean, like, who can beat that? So what the bleep? I'm told that I can't say the F word, in the first 3 minutes of a YouTube video, so I'm going to save that for later. Lots of F-bombs coming in just a little bit, so hold on. So anyway, maximally sensual sex. What the bleep are we talking about here? Well, with apologies to 99% of my audience, I'm going to get a little bit theoretical here, as I am wont to do. We've talked in previous episodes about the whole notion of all of your nerve endings and everything inside of you and every little molecule on your skin and every surface of your body and every internal surface of your body and all that kind of shit, how it is constantly, how these things are constantly sending signals up to this mysterious, rather silly thing called the brain. And if all of these were allowed to get through, they say, you would go bonkers, like real fast, because there's too much of it, so there are filtering systems, and this ultimately ends up with things we were talking about in our last episode, things like the ego, the superego, and the id, and some of the filtering that lets you understand or know or feel or experience the things that your sensory organs are putting up into your brain. Some of those things are judgmental. As a result of various things, the superego and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of judgment going on between what you touch, let's just say, or what you taste, let's just say, or what you smell, let's just say, or what, all this sort of stuff. What you see, what you see also. There's a lot of judgment going on the way up to the brain, and only a certain amount of it gets through. But as I just said a moment ago, if it all got through, you go crazy. And then they have those things called psychedelic drugs, and that's what a lot of those psychedelic drugs do, or so I'm told. That they kind of turn some of the filters off, so a lot of the stuff gets through that wouldn't normally get through. And people say, "Oh, I'm seeing visions. I am seeing visions of the great eternal, of the great cosmic order. I now know what it is." Well, it's not what it is at all, in my opinion. It's just all this noise that comes up through your sensory organs. So that's basically how the structure begins. It's an interesting place to start. What's a polite word of saying this? My dearly beloved one of the present moment just placed her fingers ever so gently on my thigh and said, "Mr. Sensuality, you're a bad dude for not having told the folks out there about synesthesia. Did you imagine that they were so turned on by your voice, your dulcet tones, that they lacked the brain power to understand it? Florinda, what would I ever do without you?" According to Galina Sabchin of Dragovich Ivan Franko State University, Dragovich, Ukraine, synesthesia is an original sensation that results from irritation or stimulation of any sense organ with a simultaneous sensation corresponding to another sense organ. A simple example. You see a flash of light and you feel a sensation like touch, a tingling or a burning, or you hear a whoosh or a boom, or the other way around. You hear the whoosh or boom and see a flash, feel a tingle, or even taste the tingle. You inhale and somehow it's there. Investigating this phenomenon, Marina Leonovna Zaitseva, professor of the Department of History and Theory of Performance Art at Maimonides State University Academy, Moscow, determines that synesthesia is the realization in this phenomenon of the idea of synthesis of human sensory capabilities, the epistemological, logical orientation of the ideas of holistic perception and historicism. Holistic perception. Holistic. The whole is perceiving. The whole is perceiving. My favorite thing is that I get different, really vivid imagery for each sexual position. Like, one's a big building full of empty rooms. One's a train yard at dusk. Another, barrels floating down a river. I have no idea why. It's very mysterious and very wonderful to share these visions with my lover. Another person. When I hug her or kiss her, I see strange, vivid images in my mind. Sometimes they are beautiful, a pulsating mandala of balls of light, or an intricate, sprawling lichen on a mossy rock in a misty forest, or an iridescent fog. Other times they are bizarre and intense. For example, a multi-limbed, dancing, boldly colored cave painting of a woman. Yet other times they are mundane, ridiculous, and even hilarious. A jar of mayonnaise, or a derpy frog running into a wall, or a cake decorated with raw green beans. Another recipe here for you today on Explore Ecstatic Sensuality. Who are these people? What are they talking about? Are they on drugs? No. Sexual synesthesia usually receives the name orgasm color, although it is actually a much wider phenomenon. Its inducers can be either orgasm itself or sexual activity in general, and also caressing, general touch, and hugging and kissing with one's partner. And I therefore believe that it would be much better described as sexual and romantic synesthesia. Both during the sexual trance, orgasm, and affectionate moments with their lovers, some people perceive colors, shapes, patterns, objects, and whole scenes involving places and people. Sometimes the images are complex and or figurative. So rather than being synesthesia, they are actually more similar to the hallucinatory processes. In a few cases, these colors and images show consistency, the same color or picture, always corresponding to the same inducing concept, although it appears to be much more common for them to be random, and with no link to a specific triggering aspect, and never repeating. Variety. Variety. No compulsion to repeat. These colors and images are not only perceived during sex, and definitely not only during orgasm. They are perceived when there is physical contact, sexual or non-sexual, with one's partner during moments of tender, loving relaxation. And normally in the case of a stable relationship and not with occasional partners. The phenomenon thus occurs not only during the sexual trance, but also in response to hugging, caressing, and kissing, but only with a person with whom one is in an intimate, romantic relationship. What is synesthesia? Some tight-ass professors claim that only 4% of people have it, as if it were something bad. But you and your lover can learn to be synesthetic. You and your lover can experience a different psychedelic vision with each sexual position, with each caress, with each orgasm. Your love life can become transcendental, cosmic. It can encompass the universe, all universes. As we like to say here on Explore Ecstatic Sensuality, the podcast that always leaves you with a happy ending, there are no limits. The best part is that you and your sexual partner, or partners, synesthesia is especially great for threesomes, since women tend to be more synesthetic than men, can learn to develop synesthesia. Once again, it is a particularly fun project for those in a ménage à trois. How? Just listen to my Explore Ecstatic Sensuality episode on synesthesia. There for the tasting. on all podcast channels and on the tube of the U. So let's circle back to the theoretical discussion that my dear Florinda didn't want to hear so much. Florinda, would you take your hand off my thigh, please? She was named after the wonderful actress Felinda Bolcon, star of, amongst other things, Luchino Visconti's The Damned, plus other movies. Very, very cool woman. I believe she's still alive, and she's the consort of a noblewoman, and they were living in South America last time I checked. Florinda, the other Florinda, please, please, please get in touch with me ASAP. I'd love to hear from you. Another aspect of this entire story is in terms of your senses. And we're going to get much more into this later. You allegedly have sight and sound and taste and hearing. You know, those standard senses, and your ophthalmologist and your optometrist measure your sight. And your audiologist and your ocularologist is a funny word for that I can never pronounce, takes care of your hearing and all that kind of stuff. Curious thing, a few years ago, not that long ago, some really nice guys. I was walking on New Year's Eve because of various issues. The woman I was living with at the time had invited this crazy person over, and she'd gone off to hear a band or something, and I had the flu and didn't want to go, so I went out walking. So I had to go out walking to my own place, and some really nice guys, they were cool, came up to me, and they were interested in the contents of my pockets, and because I hesitated only slightly, I was going to give them my money, but not my credit cards. That's how thought happens in this world. Smart guy that I wasn't, they just took something, I think it was a lead pipe, and hit me on the head with it. After that, I had a concussion and fracture and all this kind of stuff. You know, my girlfriend, the woman I was living with at the time, she was a really good cook. And by the way, if you're a guy, always choose a woman, or let her choose you. Always have a woman handy who is a really good cook. Because you know what? It's the sense of taste and smell, all that kind of stuff. I wrote about this in one of my novels, and that is that the combination of various like food and wine and sex, you know, it's not like you have a good dinner, then you go home and you get into bed. Sometimes those things can be combined in interesting, fun ways. Think about it. We separate things too much. We separate things too much. Our activities, as they are called. So anyway, after that, my girlfriend would make me some really wonderful food, and I wouldn't want to eat it because it just didn't. It wasn't what it used to be. And finally, they got around to taking me to some kind of neurologist, and the neurologist did a scratch and sniff, and he said, "You know what? You can't smell nothing, dude." Oh, that was weird. So I lost a bunch of weight because there was no taste, because so much of what you think of as taste is actually smell. What are the things that you can really taste, like bitter, sweet, sour? I mean, it's a relatively short list. So I ran into a business associate / friend at a party after a few months of this, and he looked at me and he said, "Dracula," because I'd lost so much weight, I looked like Dracula. And it all came back. It came back. It didn't take it too long for my sense of smell to come back. But as I said, we separate all these things. We don't realize how important they are. So I'm going to jump over to another kind of domain of thought, and experience, which has to do with how we classify things, how we get ideas about things, how we categorize things, how we name things, how we attach nouns to things. Anytime there's an action like sticking your tongue into something, it immediately gets a name. And we put it into our filing cabinet. In the old days, in modern days, we put it into our ultra-digital hard drive or into the cloud. In the future, all of our experiences will be cataloged in the cloud. We won't even need them locally anymore. It's going to be weird. So think about a time when there were not so many standards of comparison. What do I mean? What do I mean by that? I'm going to take another quick divagation here. You know how my mind works. There was this guy named Rudolf Carnap, and he had a book called The Aufbau, and that's what it's called in philosophy, called The Logical Structure of the World. And he rapidly explains in about 3 paragraphs how the mind develops concepts of things, the individual, and the individual human. It's interesting to ask if individual cats would ever do it the same way or anything like that way. Anyway, but in the olden days, in the good old olden days, let's even look at the cave. The cave is a place where there weren't any words. Okay, so a person is a human, and even a Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon kind of dude or dudette is there, and they're chewing on their meat from this animal they've just slaughtered out in the wilderness. And how do they conceive of that? How do they conceive of it? In a certain way, they think it's divine, perhaps, because they paint it on the wall. That whole mentality. There are people who study this as a book that my late ex gave me called The Mind of the Cave. And that's a really interesting thing. But how can we really, really know? That's one of the contemporary questions in philosophy. How can we really know anything about ice ages and those things that happened when there was no consciousness around? And then what is consciousness? And when did human consciousness arise? And how is that different from fish consciousness? Kind of big questions. If you don't think about those things, and you only think about Miley Cyrus's new album, to which I have objections, which I stated previously, then you're probably a much happier person. There was a time when everything that people saw was real. Real. You're not looking at a mountain. You're not looking at a woman or a man and immediately pulling up from your mind all the pictures of mountains that you've seen, all the pictures of women that you've seen, all the pictures of men that you've seen. And they're all coming to your mind, and you're immediately making a comparison. Now they're saying that digital is exactly like reality. There ain't no difference. Well, sure there is. It's tiny little bits of data, itty-bitty bits, that you are perceiving. Do you perceive digital exactly the same way as you perceive reality? Experiences of reality have all kinds of different aspects coming at you. Years ago, there were these smell-o-vision movies. You go in and there was literally, they changed the smell. And I read about these. This is my great-grandfather's day. Crazy, because they wanted to make movies more real. Now the way they do that is to make the sound louder. The more loud the sound is, the realer things will get. Ain't that bizarre? Very, very strange. But think about reality before media. We talked about this in our just most recent episode, and what we talked about in that episode was that this kind of mechanical reproduction, art in the era of mechanical reproduction, very famous philosophical paper by Walter Benjamin. Don't have to divagate onto that one today. But it began around 1900 with movies, and photographs were kind of not so much a big a deal. They slowly caught on, but then movies came in. Boy, they changed. And my dear friends Louis and whatever the other one's name, Lumière, came along, and Fox Talbot and Muybridge and all these bizarre dudes came along with movies. And ultimately what this created was a kind of divergence between the kinds of things that you can see and in other cases feel and touch. But going back to what I said just a moment ago, it used to be that everything we experienced was real. was real. And even before that, as I said a moment ago, it was real without any kind of standard of comparison that we derive from anything else other than our own experience. There was no other standard of comparison, nothing to judge things against, nothing to categorize things by. That was it. And then, things like novels came along, and they had to do with the imagination. But when you read a novel, are you imagining things from your own experience? Well, that's an interesting question. And I'm going to ask you that question. Or are these kind of coming up really from an imaginary world in which it's all happening in your mind and not in a scenario that you've experienced yourself? I'm not going to go on with that because it's too complicated. See, there's this big, huge difference between how things used to be before the era of media, and particularly before now. It's gotten worse. It's gotten much, much, much worse. We're surrounded by it. We can't escape it. It's everywhere. It is everywhere. It is total immersion. We're engulfed in it. Everywhere we go, everything we see, we cannot escape it. And of course, everything is an advertisement. Everything is an advertisement. You can't escape that either. Everything. Think about it. It's embedded. It's embedded everywhere. But let's not divagate onto that too much. I'm just sort of looking at how things are today versus how they were a long time ago. And now, finally, he's going to say something about sex. Well, we'll kind of dance around and approach that theme anyway. You've waited a long time. I admire your patience. When we are having, quote unquote, having sex, let's forget about sex. Sex. Let's talk about, this is the Explore Ecstatic Sensuality podcast. Let's talk about sensuality on the human level. We're skipping over from our senses to sensuality. Last time we talked about a guy named Norman O. Brown, who had this idea of polymorphous perversity, which is the idea that we're all living in this state of maximum, all the morphs, all the forms of pleasure. We call it jouissance here. All the forms of pleasure are all coming at you all the time, and you're just awash in this like hot tub of pleasure. Life ain't nothing but a hot tub of pleasure, or a jacuzzi of pleasure. Take your pick, any model that you like. They're going to be for sale. At the end of this episode, I'm going to sell you the best one, and I'm going to make a lot of money. He talked about that, but let's just get back to our ordinary experience as people. Let's talk about sight. Let's talk about looking at someone, understanding how we are or are not attracted to them, and taking them in with our eyes sensually, rather than making that very quick cell phone photo. We do these all the time. We make cell phone photos of everything. We want to freeze things in time. We want to freeze that instant, that horrible expression. I usually don't take a good photograph, so I know what that's all about. A lady friend of mine took a bunch of photographs of me at a famous art gallery here, and she forwarded one to me, and she said, "That's not a very good expression, but you should have seen the ones I deleted." Oh, God. Please, baby, never show me those. We freeze these moments in time everywhere. And what do we do with them? Are we trying to reconstruct our lives somehow? In case everything falls apart, we can immediately go back and say, I've got all these photographs. What is that? But that's not reality. That's not reality. Or people I was at a wonderful concert last weekend, and first thing string quartet, first thing people do is to hold up those cell phones and start filming little bits and pieces of the thing. Are you really experiencing the concert when you're doing that? Some people say, oh yeah, well, I'm just doing this to show Aunt Betsy in Sacramento. What are you doing? Where's the experience there? Where is the experience there at all? At any rate, take someone in with your eyes fully. It's almost like pretending that you've never seen a human being before. It's like really appreciating the contours, really appreciating the texture of their skin, really appreciating what they're wearing and how it flows on their body without anything judgmental. Oh God, that's the least stylish person I've ever seen. Oh, yeah. You're not really taking if you're being judgmental all the time, if you're processing too much. We process our inputs too much. It's over-processed to the point that the aesthetic, if I may say that, experience is missing. The experience of experiencing beauty and sensuality, and beauty and sensuality are at least first cousins if they're not brother and sister. It would be incestuous if they start fooling around. That's really, really the key thing. And then, as the relationship continues, if there's a relationship, whatever it is, maybe you see each other and there's an attraction, and who knows, you may hug to say goodbye or shake hands, but not in that grab, shake, deal. There's ways of making that physical contact with a person that you're attracted to. And again, we've talked about attraction a lot in early episodes of this podcast. But with a person you're attracted to, there's so much to take in a sensory way. There's so much to... Sensory experience is joy. Categorizing things is not joy. Judging things is not joy. Sensory experience is joy. It's joyous. That's what it is. That's what it is. And then we get to things like, we're already talking about touch. Since we're already talking about touch, let's just go there for a while. How many things do we touch? The up button on the elevator and the down button on the elevator. We touch the remote. Everything's about touching a remote. How many remotes do you have? I have friends who live out somewhere, and they've got like 16 remotes. They can't play a DVD. They can't, nothing in their own home can they play. Not a CD, not a DVD, whatever nowadays. They ain't got no choice unless it's on one of these, unless it can be conjured up with one of these remotes. It's totally weird, but they can't figure them out. So they're saying that. They go, click, 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 click. Can you figure this one out? No. Can I? No, maybe it's the third one that's hidden in the cushions under the couch. No, the dog ate that one. The dog ate the remote. Oh, my God. Now the dog is going to control the TV and the cable and all that kind of stuff. So, that's kind of the environment, the world in which we live in, as Paul McCartney once said. Oh, God, my grandfather's favorite, Paul McCartney. Ugh, scary. That's what it's all about. Touch lacks that primal quality. Touch is now lacking that quality of really feeling things like the temperature, the warmth, the softness, the texture of things. I'm not going to be the first one who says this, and I'm sure I'm not going to be the last, but go through an entire day really touching and feeling. And then there's touching with the fingertips, just a little bit. And then there's a broader kind of touch. And there's touching with the palm. There's touching with the knuckles. There's touching an object with other parts of your body that aren't necessarily so turned on or tuned in to touch. Touching with your cheek. Let your cheek rub against something. Let your elbow rub against something. Your feet. I'm not the person to speak about these things, but the feet are like trained not to be sensual because they're just, if feet have to get hard in a certain way, but not necessarily. Let's not stop there. But it's the whole deal. Going through an entire day, just as practice, like maximizing your sense of touch, without so much processing, without putting too many words in the middle, and without making comparison. That tastes like sandpaper. I took her bra off and her back felt like sandpaper. I don't know. It was a silliness. But just touch in a very original way. Touch as if you are that cave individual way back then. Just touch. And then go through so-called nature. Deus sive natura. God or nature. That's how the philosopher Spinoza referred to God/nature in all of his writings, and ultimately he was excommunicated from Judaism precisely because he did that, because he wrote as if God and nature were the same. You could use either term interchangeably. It didn't matter. That was his view of the world. That was his view of the universe. Curious idea. So you ask the question, if God or nature are the same, how could nature have made itself? We think of God as making things. Nature is here because of God. So Spinoza comes along and says, well, you can say God or nature, a curious thing, as if somehow nature is auto-generating force. That's just old Spinoza, back then quite some time ago. Go on a walk through wherever you walk through the forest. Find plants to touch. Rocks and minerals are great. They're amazing. They're not really the same, Again, textures, sense of roughness. The willingness of anything that you touch to allow itself, quote unquote, to be touched. The willingness to yield to you, to yield to the will and the desire that is in your touch. Touch can communicate desire. Desire. It's very important. Desire is always important. Jacques Lacan, our favorite and our sponsor, always used to say, never give up on your desire. And thanks to Jacques for sponsoring all of these episodes. We really, really appreciate it. So, that's touch. And of course, touch is something that happens very intimately. Let's take touch with the tongue. I'm not going to take the time to look it up and find out how many nerve endings are in the tongue, but there's a whole bunch of them. Will that satisfy you? And of course, there are a whole bunch of nerve endings in this thing called the clitoris. I'm not going to look that up either, but this, let's just say that a interaction between the tongue and the clitoris, really can't imagine anymore, but of course, two tongues, man, as I often say in these podcasts. Kissing is the most underrated activity in the universe. There's so much going on there. And then, of course, taste begins to come into things. Taste and touch. Taste your lover. Taste your lover. I have a friend who goes, this woman who stays here, I used to be involved with, and she goes to all these wine tastings. She's got about half a dozen a week, or maybe not that many, but it's okay, you're going around and you're sipping and you're spitting. Sip, sip, split, split. That kind of stuff. I've gone to those too. They're kind of wild. So there was this wine tasting, the sip and spit event, and it was at the Peninsula Hotel here in Los Angeles. I don't remember what sorts of wine we were supposed to be tasting. It was a while ago. Golly, was it Italian wines? Italian wines? Maybe so. But anyway, we were going along and doing the routine, and some were good and some less good and that kind of stuff. By the end of one of those things, unless you're a real pro, you really don't much care, because no matter how much spitting you do, you're guaranteed to get sloshed. So I kept seeing this woman out of the corner of my eye, and man, what was it about her? She was kind of tall, brunette. What do you call it? Chiseled face? It was like a very, like a face that one would wish to paint It was that kind of a face, but we were like going back and forth with our eyes, and I would pretend not to be looking at her, the old routine, but she would know perfectly well I was looking at her. And she would look at me, and I would pretend not to notice. It was kind of fun. But that's one of the virtues of going to wine tastings. I guess the others are the blah, blah, blah. But that was kind of fun. But of course then you kind of start immediately to categorize. Which is better? Is this Zinfandel better or worse than that Chardonnay? That kind of nonsense. Taste and touch between a man and a woman, I would say, or between the genders of your choice, of your preference, is a very, very, very individual, singular sort of thing, and it's always going to be different. And when things are always different, that's the fun part. That's the fun part. It's going to be different depending upon where you've been during the day. It's going to be different depending on what you've eaten during the day or had to drink during the day or felt, or, whether you just took a shower or took a shower, 6 hours ago, or whether you've had some bath oil or one of those kind of things. Nothing wrong with that stuff. That stuff is great. That stuff is great. I don't put it down. But sometimes we let things stand in the way of the direct, unmediated experience of our senses, of our body, of our fingers, of our tongue, touching anything, interacting with anything. And touch is always, with another human, is always an interaction. It's always an interaction. It's never just, I as a guy am pawing somebody in order, ostensibly, allegedly, to turn her on, when I'm actually doing it to turn myself on. That's the old routine. We talked about that before. What's going on here? It's just a whole bunch of very routinized behavior. It's behavior. We're behaving here. But that's not really where it's at. Sound is such an important part of sensuality. Listen to a person you're attracted to. Listen to their breathing. Listen to it. It's there, It's always there. It's under the surface. Even if you're in a loud fucking restaurant, it's late enough in the podcast that I can say that. Even if you're in a loud fucking restaurant, or you're out at a Beyonce concert, or one of those things, or a hop-hip concert, whatever, your lover, the person you're attracted to, is always breathing. You can see them breathe, and you can hear them breathe. And the breath is life. I remember hearing that as a line in an old horror movie. The breath is life. The breath is life. That's true. We can't deny that one. And there are wonderful people out there. Nita DiFrancesco, www.tantrawisdom.com, teaches amazing classes in breathing. And breathing is important for your health. Breathing is important for your sexuality. Breathing is important for your sensuality. It has long been a part of yoga, about which I'm not going to speak whatsoever today. But this is this whole amazing interplay of the senses, polymorphous perversity, as our good buddy Norman O. Brown, known by his colleagues as Nobby, used to talk about. It's really about this vast interplay of senses. So we've covered taste, we've covered touch, we've covered hearing. These are things that are all really part of the mixture, part of the sensuousness. And it's not like you get in bed and you start humping and bumping, and these things kind of fall by the wayside, because the guy wants to ejaculate, but not too fast, and the woman wants to have her, orgasm, but kind of she's taught that she has that, and then she wants the whole thing to come to a rapid ending and maybe have the guy roll over and smoke a cigarette. Because that's maybe you shouldn't like the guy so much, or maybe because you just wanted to get it over with and that kind of stuff. The sensuality of the entire thing. It begins with sensuality, it ends with sensuality, but in a certain way it never ends. The concept that, we talked about this all the time too, the concept that lovemaking is this little glitch in the course of one's behavior that has a certain defined time, defined episode in one's life. And again, say things like, foreplay is what happens between orgasms. I love that. But we'll talk about this again too. Foreplay with the world, making love to life, as my friend Anita DiFrancesco talks about, whom I very much admire as an authority on these things. Bringing maximum sensuality to sex makes sex almost an entirely different thing. It is weird that people have more of a sensual reaction or more of a sensual feeling or context to eating. This was a great dinner, and you're tasting all this stuff, all these varieties of things, and they have more of a sensual experience and a sensual immersion in food than they do in sex. Think about it. That is really, really, really weird. People are open to that kind of sensual immersion when they're having a great dinner, or they're open to that kind of sensual immersion when they're in a fucking jacuzzi, or they're open to that kind of sensual immersion when they're getting a massage. And by the way, this is the only podcast that always gives you a happy ending. Okay? People are open to sensuality in so many contexts like this, especially massages, saunas, jacuzzis, hot tubs, whirlpools, when they're out sunbathing, for heaven's sake, or when they're letting someone apply that stuff to their body so that they won't burn. There's photos about who is it? Miley Cyrus having her girlfriend put sun lotion on her body. It's just too much. These are times when people really allow the sensuality of the experience to take over. Taking over is maybe the wrong word in one sense, but it's the right word in another. They really allow themselves to be immersed in, to submerge in, to go under the surface in, to be in this whole different world. Yes, you can breathe underwater. I repeat, yes, you can breathe underwater. We think we can't. We have this idea that if we go under the surface and we're letting it really, really engulf us like that, or surround us, surround every pore of our bodies, get into every part of our bodies. If we allow ourselves to really get under the surface and then float with the current, let the waves and the flowing waters carry us about. One day it may be to Hawaii, another day it may be someplace totally different, Ibiza, Necker Island, where I'm doing this podcast from. Let it carry you. On the other hand, as we also talked about in our previous episode, there's this matter of will. Yeah, it's important to do what you want. It's important still to maximalize pleasure by conceiving of pleasure, but not in words. You touch someone in a certain way, and your mind, at a certain very primal level, is saying, how can I make this touch more pleasurable? It's all about pleasure, or jouissance, as we call it, another topic for another time. It's all about pleasure. Ain't about nothing else. It's all about pleasure. People talk about love and all this kind of stuff in bed. Okay, if it turns you on, that's fine. No objections to that. But let's, in a certain way, put sensuality first. Let's put sensuality in the driver's seat of our, 1983 Porsche 911 SL like I used to have. Let's put sensuality and pleasure in the driver's seat. And love comes after that, boys and girls, ladies and germs. Love comes after that. It's easy. I got to tell you, it's real easy. If there's two people, not just one, but if there's two people really immersed deeply in this kind of sensual sex, there's going to be love, baby. There's going to be love, baby. And some say, well, this is kind of thing that only lasts for 6 months, and you've had your sex, and it's all over, and blah, blah, blah. That's all it can do. And we jump from one of these things to the other. Well, that's okay. And you use the word love, maybe, while you're doing this 6-month episode of sex, mini relationship, or affair. And that's okay. I ain't gonna put you down for that. And but people can have this for years. I've discovered, I've been told. I'm still waiting for mine. Miley, you gotta come back to me, baby. Okay. But it can go on for years, but in a certain way, who gives an airborne copulation? In a certain way, who gives an airborne copulation? All right, you bought a house together and you have kids and you've got responsibilities and you've got a business together and manufacturing sex toys. You've got all the stuff together, and you don't want to make this brief, and then there's 10,000 podcasts about how to make the passion last, how to make it last, how to make love last, all this kind of stuff. But it's more like it's more like if you're really immersed, submerged in all this sensuality, I think it's got a much better chance to last. That's what makes it last. And people say, make it new. Always make it new. Well, yeah, I say that. How do you make it new? You make it new by getting rid of the concepts and the words. You make it new by maximum freedom of expression. Love is theater. We talked about in our last episode. Love is a continually creative activity. Creation is sensuality. When I make music, there's sensuality. When I make art, it's sensuality. It's an interplay between my listening of what I'm doing and my creating, the feel of the paintbrush in my hand, the feel of the keys on the piano. It'd all be sensual, baby. That's what we're talking about here. And I invite you to take what I've been saying here today and elevate it to any new heights that you like. But more important, try it out. I've suggested little things like the touch experiment. You can do taste experiments. You can do sight experiments. You can look at something in the real world and not make any comparisons at all, not even give it a name, not call it anything, not calling it a mountain, not calling it a 1960 Porsche Speedster. I'd love to have one of those. I talked about that earlier. But don't call it anything, just to take it all in. And it ain't pixels. It ain't little tiny dots that your brain's got to put together. It's all there. It's all out there. It is real. It is real. And do it with all of your senses. Each one of your senses. Do it with hearing. Listen. Let's turn everything off and listen and see what's there. There is a composer named John Cage, about which I have some good thoughts and some less good thoughts, but no negative thoughts. So they put this guy into, what's it called, anechoic chamber or something like that, which is something that's designed to shut out all the sound. I wonder, you can't really do that, well, maybe you can with sight. It's interesting if you can really do that with other organs of your body. Neither here nor there. So they put him in this thing, and allegedly if you put somebody in things like, in places like that, in these chambers, in these places where you can't hear anything, may go nuts after a certain period of time, unless you're in a very high meditative state. So they put John Cage into this thing, and they took him out, and he said, your machine don't work. The machine is broken. Sorry, you got to fix this thing. You're sticking me in this thing, and it didn't have the effect it was supposed to have. The experimenter said, why do you think that's the case? And John Cage said, you're the scientist. You're supposed to know these things, not me. The scientist said, well, you know what you were hearing? It's the rushing of blood through your veins, through your arteries. It could even maybe go down, this is not what scientists there said, even go down to the cellular level. Feel as deeply as you can, sense as deeply as you can. So take each of your senses, like, for example, the sense of smell, or the sense of sight, or the sense here of hearing, and turn everything off, or don't, and just listen. In the world in which we live in, there ain't that much silence, believe you me. Whatever it is or isn't where you are, just take it in. Don't attribute any meaning or significance. There are too many planes flying over my neighborhood, and I don't get pissed off, but I should. That's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about control. We're not talking about judgment. We're just talking about the experience of sound. Or they say, go out to a place with it which isn't filled with the urban sort of sounds. So those are hard to find. Those are really hard to find. But look for one. And just do that. Experiment. Just do that. Or take something, a very simple thing like a lemon, and stick your tongue into it. Or, just approach it very, very, very simply. Cut it open and just don't do or think anything. Just let the whole experience take you over, but without even thinking, I'm going to just sit here and do this. Just very, very calmly, there it is. There's everything there. There's sight, there's touch, there's smell, there's taste, all working together, not separated. And they have these lemon extract or concentrate and all this kind of thing, pseudo-lemon, and they have those. I know that they have those things. And that's what the world is filled with. It's filled with simulacra. It's filled with pseudos. We live in a world of pseudos. We live in a world of fakes. We live in a world of the unreal. It's already here. This AI business and GBT. It's all just, we're just talking about these things because we don't want to stop and think that we live in a world of fakes. Back to digital media and all that kind of stuff. It's fake. It's fake. The streaming shows, fake. It's all fake. It's not experience. It's all fake. The best jobs in the world are about making fakes. It's all fake. But that little sweet little lemon there is just sitting there, and you can just experience the whole thing. Or any kind of food. Doesn't really matter. Experience the thing. Take a scallop. I've been in correspondence recently about scallops. I may have mentioned scallops earlier today. I wrote about sexy scallops in one of my novels. Think about a scallop. Just go through the whole process of sitting there in front of these scallops. What am I going to do with them? Before I do anything, I'm going to maybe let them defrost a little bit and appreciate them in all the ways that you can appreciate a scallop. And don't follow a recipe. Just think in your mind how you would like that scallop, what you would like to do with that scallop before you taste it. Not before you eat it. Not before you consume it. We live in the era of consumption. It's all about consumption. One way or another. It's all about ownership. It's all about acquisition. It's all about consumption. It's not about the sensual experience of things. You look at something, even with members of the opposite sex or your chosen sex, you look at something and the first thing that you say is, I want to possess it. I want to consume it. I want to restrict its freedom. I want it to be all mine, and then I want to, when I'm all used up with it, I want to throw it away and not have to worry about it anymore after that. It's gone. That's the world in which we live in. So I'm not being political here. No, I'm never political. You're fully authorized to report this podcast to the woke authorities now, or the sleep authorities, or any of those authorities that you like, if I ever get political. But it's just the nature of the modern world. There was a writer in Italy called Julius Evola, and he wrote a book called Revolt Against the Modern World, and we're not going to go into him today at all, but we all should be engaged at one level or another in a revolt against the modern world. I mean, he said things like, well, let's go back to medieval times or whatever. He had these, and he was kind of a fascist of politics, but it's kind of like we don't even allow ourselves to think about something entirely different. I mean, people go out into the wherever, and they live these. What was that film that we saw recently? Women Talking. Bizarre little movie, and people are in this. Women are in this society where they're sort of shut off from everything else, but they're still having these confrontations and argumentation, all kind of stuff, and they're still conceptualizing everything. And this ain't my idea of leaving society at all, or having a purer life, or a life not so pummeled by media. Or then there were the hippies. I knew people who were like my grandfather's generation who were in communes and all this kind of stuff. But I mean, they had rock music blaring at them all the time. So how are they protecting themselves from all of that? So I've given you a bunch of challenges today of things to do. Not in a certain way things to think about. I've given you challenges of things to do. What is really useful in this kind of thing is to find collaborators. Call them lovers, call them relationship partners, call them people you go on dates with, call them friends with benefits, call them fuck buddies, call them anything that you like, but collaborators are really useful, and all these things are more rewarding and fun with a collaborator. And that's what you all ought to go look for. That's my big assignment for you characters this week, and that is go find a partner in crime to explore ecstatic sensuality. The only podcast that leaves you with a happy ending. This podcast is dedicated to all the loveless, sexless people in the world. May our voice be heard.